I want to go over exactly what an Israelite woman can and cannot wear according to the law. These laws, of course, do not apply to the other nations, however, they are not as radical as some Israelites teach. And let me make the clarification that if an Israelite congregation or camp has decided on a dress code and you follow that congregation, then you should follow the rules of your elders, just as Paul gave different instructions to different churches based on what would be best for them. Your elders have made the same decision. But I'd like to go through the law and give the simple interpretation of it, or at least my understanding. Let's start in the book of John. I'm going to read chapter 7 and verse 24. Judge not according to the appearance, but judge righteous judgment. This is red letter, therefore a commandment that we not judge according to appearance, but according to righteousness. And we know how to do this according to Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 25. And it shall be our righteousness if we observe to do all these commandments before the Lord our God as he commanded us. So we are to judge according to the commandments. I'm going to read Deuteronomy chapter 4 and verse 2. Ye shall not add unto the word which I command you, neither shall ye diminish out from it, that ye may keep the commandments of the Lord your God which I command you. We are not allowed to add unto it. So no matter how much we think something appears wrong, we are not allowed to judge it to be wrong if there is no commandment saying so. I'm going to read the book of Romans chapter 4 and verse 15. Because the law worketh wrath, for where no law is, there is no transgression. Paul is reminding us here that if there isn't a law that forbids something, then we aren't sinning. So we'll look at some New Testament texts that a lot of elders take instruction from in advising the women in their congregation of what they should wear. First, I'm going to go to 1 Timothy chapter 2, and I'm going to read verses 8 and 9. I will therefore that men pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands without wrath and doubting. In like manner also, that women adorn themselves in modest apparel with shamefacedness and sobriety, not with braided hair or gold or pearls or costly array. So this is the verse that everyone will go to when they want to advise women to dress modestly, which isn't bad advice, but we can see in context that this is referring to when they pray amongst the congregation, as we see they are also advised against expensive clothing and jewelry. And of course there is no law against this in Israel. Let me give a quick example. I'm going to go to the book of Judith, and I'm going to read a few passages, but I'm going to start in chapter 8 and read verses 4 to 8. So Judith was a widow in her house 3 years and 4 months, and she made her a tent upon the top of her house, and put on sackcloth upon her loins, and wear her widow's apparel. And she fasted all the days of her widowhood, save the eves and Sabbaths, and the Sabbaths and the eves of the new moons, and the new moons and the feasts on solemn days of the house of Israel. She was also of a goodly countenance, and very beautiful to behold. And her husband Manasseh had left her gold and silver, and menservants and maidservants, and cattle and lands, and she remained upon them. And there was none that gave her an ill word, as she feared God greatly. So Judith was a woman from the tribe of Simeon, who was respected in Israel. She made a prayer to God, which you can read in chapter 9 of this book, but I'll pick up again in chapter 10, and I'm going to read it verses 1 to 4. Now after that she had ceased to cry unto the God of Israel, and had made an end of all these words. She rose where she had fallen down, and called her maid, and went down into the house in the which she abode in the Sabbath days and in her feast days, and pulled off the sackcloth which she had on, and put off the garments of her widowhood, and washed her body all over with water, and anointed herself with precious ointment, and braided the hair of her head, and put attire upon it, and put on her garments of gladness, wherewith she was clad during the life of Manasseh her husband. And she took sandals upon her feet, and put about her bracelets, and her chains, and her rings, and her earrings, and all her ointments, and decked herself bravely, to allure the eyes of all men that should see her. So she wore makeup, and wanted the attention of all that saw her, all a part of her plan to save Israel. I'll just show how much we honored her next by going to chapter 16, and I'm going to read verses 21 to 25. After this time, everyone returned to his own inheritance, and Judith went to Bethulia, and remained in her own possession, as was in her time honorable in all the country. And many desired her, but none knew her all the days of her life, after that Manasseh her husband was dead, and was gathered up to his people. But she increased more and more in honor, and waxed old in her husband's house, being 105 years old, and made her maid free, so that she died in Bethulia. And they buried her in the cave of her husband Manasseh. And the house of Israel lamented her 7 days. And before she died, she did distribute her goods to all them that were nearest of kindred to Manasseh her husband, and to them that were in the nearest of her kindred. And there was none that made the children of Israel any more afraid in the days of Judith, nor a long time after her death. So she wore makeup, fine clothes, and perfume, and she was one of the most respected women in all of Israel. And we know from reading, if we read Sirach chapter 36 and 22, the beauty of a woman cheereth the countenance, and a man loveth nothing better. So she knew what she was doing in her plan to save Israel. This doesn't mean to dress without discretion, because we can also read in Sirach 26 and verse 15. A shamefaced and faithful woman is a double grace, and her continent mind cannot be valued. So the idea is to be graceful. I bring all of this up to say that Timothy's instruction was for women to appear humble before God in their prayers. It wasn't for them to dress like that all the time. And now we'll look at Paul in 1 Corinthians 11 again to clarify another verse often used in instructing women on how to dress. I'm going to go to chapter 11 verses 4 to 6. Every man praying or prophesying, having his head covered, dishonoureth his head. But every woman that prayeth or prophesieth with her head uncovered, dishonoureth her head. For that is even all as one as if she were shaven. For if the woman be not covered, let her also be shorn. But if it be a shame for a woman to be shorn or shaven, let her be covered. This is referring to a veil that covers your face, but we can read verses 15 and 16 to get a different understanding anyway. But if a woman have long hair, it is a glory to her, for her hair is given her for a covering. But if any man seem to be contentious, we have no such custom, neither the churches of God. So no matter how you interpret these verses, Paul lets us know that this isn't part of the law. Therefore, you wouldn't be in sin if you chose, however you chose to pray or to read the Bible. So let's look at the actual law concerning how we are supposed to dress. All instruction can basically be found in Deuteronomy chapter 22. We'll start with verses 11 and 12 as this pertains to all Israelites, male or female. Verse 11. Thou shalt not wear a garment of diverse sorts, as of woolen and linen together. So this is clear. We cannot wear any fabrics made of mixed fabrics, so only 100% materials. This doesn't mean you have to wear all cotton on one day and all linen on the next. You can wear a linen top and a cotton bottoms if you want. It just means that the woven fabric cannot be mixed. This law is a repetition of a law that was given to us earlier in Leviticus 19 and 19. Ye shall keep my statutes. Thou shalt not let thy cattle gender with a diverse kind. Thou shalt not sow thy field with mingled seed. Neither shall a garment mingled of linen and woolen come upon thee. So we see this is where the law in Deuteronomy came from. But let's go back to Deuteronomy chapter 22 and read verse 12 now. Thou shalt make thee fringes upon the four quarters of thy vesture, wherewith thou coverest thyself. Now I have to explain this law by showing where this law was first given to us. We're going to go to the book of Numbers and read chapter 15 and verse 58. Speak unto the children of Israel, and bid them that they make them fringes in the borders of their garments throughout their generations, and that they put upon the fringe of the borders a ribbon of blue. So we are supposed to make fringes on the borders of our garments with a border of blue. if we look at the Hebrew word here, tzitzit, this is often translated as tassels by the Israelis, but this is not the case. The word tassels is used in Deuteronomy chapter 22 and 12, which is why you will see some Israelites use the 4 tassels on the bottom of their garment. However, how I was taught to interpret this verse was by reading 4 quarters or 4 corners as an idiom that means all around, as the 4 corners would be referring to the 4 cardinal directions, north, east, south, and west. We see this exact phrase used again in Isaiah chapter 11 and verse 12. And he shall set up an ensign for the nations, and shall assemble the outcasts of Israel, and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the 4 corners of the earth. So we know there are not 4 corners of the earth, and that Israel and Judah, or the northern and southern kingdom, would be gathered from all around the world. But even if you don't receive this understanding, if you wore just the 4 tassels, you'd still be in keeping with the law. They are still tassels around your garment, basically. So we'll finish up in Deuteronomy chapter 22 by going now to verse 5. The woman shall not wear that which pertaineth unto a man, neither shall a man put on a woman's garment, for all that do so are an abomination unto the Lord thy God. So looking at the Hebrew again, we can see that this is in reference to masculine clothing and men not wearing feminine clothing. This doesn't mean trousers in general, because just as it would look weird if I wore a pink lycra tights, it'd be the same as saying if you cannot wear trousers specifically tailored for men, like I've seen some women wearing baggy jeans and Timberlands, who obviously take on a masculine appearance. We are supposed to respect the differences that are between us. I'm going to read 1 Corinthians chapter 6 verse 9. Know ye not that the unrighteous shall not inherit the kingdom of God? Be not deceived, neither fornicators, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor effeminate, nor abusers of themselves with mankind. So men are not to appear effeminate, just as women are not to appear masculine. So I hope we understand from this lesson exactly what the law says about how you can dress. As we see, a lot of this is left to your discretion, outside of not wearing mixed fabrics or wearing fringes and tassels on your garments. I will say this in defense of the elders that instruct the women in their congregation to wear dresses and head wraps. They recognize the need for us to separate ourselves from society. The law in itself does this, but we can read in Sirach chapter 7 and verse 26. Hast thou a wife after thy mind? Forsake her not, but give not thyself over to a light woman. As men and women, we need to be matched in our values and show a united front to the other nations. I'm going to read also in this same book, chapter 26 and verse 15. A shamefaced and faithful woman is a double grace, and her continent mind cannot be valued. I read that earlier. So be conscious that of all of the women on earth, God chose you. Don't throw that away following women of other nations that God doesn't even care about. I'm going to read Deuteronomy chapter 23 and verse 17. There shall be no whore of the daughters of Israel, nor a sodomite of the sons of Israel. Reading this verse, God is saying that none of his daughters should be whores. Not that it was forbidden of the other nations' women. Look at the next verse. We're going to read verse 18. Thou shalt not bring the hire of a whore, or the price of a dog, into the house of the Lord thy God for any vow. For even both of these are abomination unto the Lord thy God. So the men were forbidden from offering the same amount they would pay to a prostitute to the temple. The Most High has placed you on a pedestal, and you need to see that in yourself when comparing yourself to the women from other nations, looking at how they dress and act. I think I can finish here. If there were any other scriptures you need clarification on with regard to the dress code, leave a comment and I'll reply there or do another video at a later time. All praises to the Most High.